As of 2020, New York State had a population of 20,201,249, with 14,045,410 living in the New York City metropolitan area and 6,155,839 scattered across the rest of the state. That's quite the imbalance. Seriously, 14 million people for that tiny piece of land? That's a lot. Probably too much. In the southern part of New York City, despite its relatively small size, there are more people living than in, say, the whole of the Czech Republic or Sweden or Greece. Well, the list goes on, with over 100 items, all places where there are fewer people than in the southern part of New York City. Want more comparisons? If upstate New York were its own state, it would rank 20th in population. Meanwhile, downstate New York would proudly take 4th place. Until the 1960s, New York was pretty much the top state in the country across the board. Population, culture, economy, and then everything changed. Nowadays, the northern part of the state is practically empty. But why did that happen? I'll grab some coffee and tell you all about it. And just an unobtrusive reminder to do something under the video, in case you ever forget to do it. And thanks for understanding my wish to stay anonymous. Let's kick things off with a disclaimer. No matter what, New York is still one of the most densely populated states in the country, and its GDP beats that of nearly every country in the world. But all of this is thanks mostly to its southern part, while the north remains pretty empty by comparison. To get a sense of how the population spread out across the state, just take a look at this map. Sure, besides the south, there are a few other dark spots, but even with that, the contrast is really striking. Got it? Let's move on. What do people usually mean when they talk about upstate New York? Regions like the Capital District, Mohawk Valley, Central New York, Southern Tier, Finger Lakes, Western New York, and North Country are generally considered part of upstate. If we're talking in geographic terms, the northern part of New York includes regions located, logically, to the north and northwest of the New York metropolitan area. Here in upstate New York, you'll find plenty of popular tourist spots and fun attractions like Niagara Falls, the Adirondack and Catskill Mountains, the Thousand Islands Archipelago, the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, and the Finger Lakes. The northern part of New York State became a place for inventions and businesses of international significance. 19th century entrepreneurs found plenty of water power here, plus canals and railroads. Basically everything needed for factory work and shipping products to the market. Actually, the European discovery of New York was made by the Italian Giovanni di Verrazzano in 1524. Then in 1609, the Dutch first claimed rights to the land. Yes, it might sound strange to some, but New York was originally settled by the Dutch. This area was home to the colonial province of New Netherland. Back in 1625, they even built Fort Amsterdam at the southern end of Manhattan Island to guard the Hudson River. As time passed, the settlement expanded and became the city of New Amsterdam. And only after the Anglo-Dutch War in 1664 did England change the colony's name to New York. Of course, these lands were inhabited long before Europeans reached North America. Before European colonization, the northern part of New York State was home to several Native American tribes, in particular the Iroquois Confederacy, made up of 6 tribes known as the Six Nations, was located here. During the American Revolutionary War, many battles took place in this area, during which the Iroquois split into supporters of the Loyalists and the Patriots. Then the war ended, and the 1784 treaty, signed at Fort Stanwix, became the first in a series of agreements between the government of the independent American state and the native tribes. As a result, the Iroquois gave up the vast majority of their lands in the northern part of New York State to the newly formed United States. This helped populate the state, essentially achieving what the Dutch couldn't. Their early colonization was somewhat stalled due to conflicts with Native Americans, so the state developed, and the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825 through the northern part completely transformed the region's economy. The canal made it much easier to move goods from the upper Midwest and cities along the Great Lakes through northern New York and into the New York City port. As a result, northern New York became a hub of production during the Second Industrial Revolution. It gave birth to companies like General Electric, IBM, Kodak, and Xerox. The rapid industrialization led to a huge influx of immigrants looking for work in factories all over the region. It was a success, but it couldn't last forever. And here's the first reason why the northern part of the state is so sparsely populated. The times when factories were buzzing everywhere are a thing of the past. Most jobs have vanished, and they're not coming back. What's left is a stagnant job market with little to offer young specialists or aspiring entrepreneurs. If you're after a career, personal growth, and a decent paycheck rather than just making ends meet, you'll likely move to a larger city, a place where opportunities keep growing over time, not shrinking. Although the median household income in New York State in 2021 was $75,157, most counties in the northern part of the state fell short of that average. The northern economy is still lagging behind the New York City metropolitan area economy. In the same year, 88% of the job growth in the state happened in the South. From 2010 to 2018, job growth in Brooklyn alone exceeded job growth in the entire northern part of New York State. In short, you won't find a job there. Well, unless you get really lucky. Actually, there's work to be found there. For example, the northern part of New York State boasts a significant mining sector. Central New York is a major salt-producing area. This makes the state the third largest salt producer in the U.S. What else? Logging. It's also an important industry in the region. For example, in 2019, New York State produced 123 million cubic feet of timber, and nearly all the sawmills in New York are located in the northern part of the state. A number of agricultural products are also grown here, including corn, hay, fruits, cabbage, and potatoes. New York State's also the second largest producer of apples, peas, and maple syrup in the United States. Plus, in the northern part of the region, dairy farming is well developed. So in reality, there are people in the northern part of the state, and they're doing something, but all the work is provided by companies that usually don't need a huge number of employees. The history of the U.S. clearly shows to harvest timber or extract ore, you only need a small town of 300 to 500 people, where everyone survives solely on what's extracted and sold. So it's not really surprising that there aren't many jobs in the northern part of the state. There are, of course, industrial towns with factories and plants. More people live and work there, but actually that's the entire population of upstate New York. The geography adds another challenge. Several regions in the north of the state are marked by large mountain ranges, big lakes, and vast forests. New York has three main mountain ranges: the Adirondacks, the Catskills, and part of the Appalachians. You can really see the terrain on this map. The mountains cover quite a large area, and the roads and settlements mostly run through the valleys between the mountains, basically wherever there's a place. All the big cities are located in the lowlands. Buffalo with its 280,000 residents, Rochester with its 211,000 people, Syracuse with their 148,000 population, and I almost forgot about Albany, where 100,000 people live. As for New York, I won't even bring it up. And while there are many large cities on the planet located in the mountains, they're mainly concentrated in South and Central America, as well as in Africa. Neither Europe nor Oceania has any large cities located higher than 3,300 feet above sea level. There are such cities in the U.S., it's true, but they're mostly concentrated in Colorado. People don't really like settling in the mountains if there's an alternative. There's too little space to fit farms and fields there, which makes it harder to feed yourself. It's also harder to get there, and it's tougher to deliver anything from food to building materials. And houses for people have to be built out of something. In short, mountains can be a real limiting factor for the development of a state. And they are. Before steam engines and internal combustion engines came along, mountains really slowed down trade, sometimes making it nearly impossible. Sure, you could haul small, expensive goods in carts, but you couldn't feed a city that way. That's why all the big historical cities were either on a waterway, near one, or in a natural harbor by the sea. Water transport was much cheaper than land transport for a long time. If you have water transport, you can feed a big city. It's that simple. What else can the northern part of New York offer people? Lack of jobs, mountains, and harsh weather? The first Dutch settlers found that New York's climate didn't meet their expectations. Since Manhattan is actually Mediterranean in latitude, these early settlers were pretty confused when they encountered its snowy, freezing winter weather. But if Manhattan seemed unpleasantly cold and damp in the winter months, the rest of the state must have been an even bigger disappointment. The average temperatures in January range from 33 degrees Fahrenheit on Long Island to 14 degrees Fahrenheit near the Stillwater Reservoir in the Adirondacks. These are the extremes, but there are notable differences in the climate between New York City and northern Albany, Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse. And since the whole state, let's say, tends to be cloudy, there are relatively few clear days here. The snowy season in upstate New York isn't just cold, it's brutal. I'm talking real blizzards, icy roads, and months of darkness because the sun sets at 4:30 p.m. Not everyone can handle it. Heating bills skyrocket, snow constantly needs shoveling, and winter tires are a must if you even want to get moving. It's a way of life that makes anyone dreaming of warmer weather run straight to the nearest beach. And these winters feel like they never end. This kind of reputation is especially true for the cities of Buffalo, Rochester, Oswego, and Syracuse. It's largely tied to something called the lake effect snow. That's when cold, dry air mixes with moisture from a body of water, forming cumulus clouds. In New York State, this process happens thanks to Lakes Ontario and Erie. Although in the city, it can get cold and it does snow too. It's nothing like the harsh winter that people in the northern part of the state have to put up with. In this state, the taxes are high. Yes, the cost of living in the north might be lower than in Manhattan, but property taxes are still there. If you thought owning a house in the north was cheaper, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you. The tax burden in the northern part of New York State can be just as heavy as a mortgage in the southern part of the state. This makes potential homeowners look for other more profitable investment options. On this map, it's easy to notice which states have particularly high property taxes, and yes, New York is colored dark. And this one shows income taxes. Once again, not much to love in New York. This map shows how much each state collects in income tax per person. New York stands out even with its cigarette taxes. They're among the highest in the country. And finally, here's a map showing the big picture, though I think you already get it. These are the states with the highest and lowest tax burdens. Residents of New York State pay one of the highest per capita tax rates in the United States, a system made possible by the state's relatively strong economic base. The state imposes income tax, sales tax, business tax, and excise tax. Local revenue is mainly generated through property and sales taxes. And then it all starts to make sense. If you're living in a state with such high taxes, you want to get the maximum benefits from that. And to actually get them, it's better to live down south. All right, we've cleared that up. But what about getting around up north? You might be surprised, but there's almost no public transport up there. If you're moving there, you better learn to love driving because you'll spend a lot of time behind the wheel. And the roads up north are in desperate need of repair. For anyone used to Uber rides on demand, the northern part of the state is definitely not the place. Forget walking to the store around the corner, because here a quick trip means you'll need an SUV. The problems of upstate New York were well depicted, even if slightly exaggerated, by The Simpsons. You could say, but hey, there are some transportation problems in the southern part of the state too, and you'd be right. The difference is that the people in the northern part of the state face an additional obstacle, the need for more government funding, while all the attention is focused on transportation issues in the south. Billions of dollars are being allocated to repair the crumbling infrastructure of the New York subway and commuter trains, so getting money for the north is not easy. And over there, they also need upgrades to the bus fleets, more service expansion. The situation is such that, for example, in Rochester, it's faster and easier to get somewhere by bike than by bus. I'm serious. A 5-mile trip by bike will take 20 minutes, but by bus, 35 minutes. In the end, it turns out that living in the South, right in New York City, is simply more profitable than in the northern part of the state. The city's been constantly developing throughout its history, and the 19th century saw especially rapid growth. In 1800, the city's population was 60,000. By 1900, it had grown to 3.4 million. During this time, the urbanized area expanded from Lower Manhattan to the entire island. Interestingly, when city commissioners laid out the street grid in 1811, they expected it would take several centuries before growth reached 155th Street. This milestone was reached by 1860. Even despite the financial panic between 1837 and 1893, the city remained an economic giant, and by 1900 had the busiest port, becoming one of the wealthiest cities in the world. So when we talk about New York State having a large population, a high GDP and all that, it's mainly thanks to the state's key city. From the very start of its history, it's the city that attracted people. When people went to New York, they weren't dreaming of the state, but of the Big Apple. Seems to me that the reason people don't live in the northern part of the state is not so much due to the climate and stuff like that, but because of the city. New York's a magnet, and if it weren't for the city, the state wouldn't be as high in the rankings, and maybe it would be more evenly populated. But the situation is gradually changing. The Census Bureau released updated data in March 2024 about the ongoing population decline in New York. According to this data, 80% of the cities have been dealing with population loss since 2020. Apart from New York City, which lost 546,164 people between 2020 and 2023, all of the 20 most populous places in the state, except for 4, saw a drop in population, including Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse. Out of the 994 big and small cities, the population increased in 191 towns, decreased in 796, and stayed the same in 7. They even made a map. The color coding of the towns on the map shows where gains and losses are concentrated on a regional scale. The South mostly consists of areas in predominantly red and pink shades. These are population losses. At the same time, groups of green-colored towns are scattered across the middle of the Hudson Valley, the northern part of the Catskill Mountains, and Suffolk County to the east, where more migrants from New York City moved after the pandemic outbreak in 2020. Yep, you got it right. New York City lost some of its population while the northern part of the state picked up that same number. But the pandemic's over, so things could change again. The most important news these past few days is that I had some super tasty meat patties made with 3 different kinds of meat. Snow City. Not so long ago, travel experts announced that the northern part of New York State is home to the largest amount of snow, not just in the U.S., but in the world. We're talking about Syracuse, which earned a reputation as the snowiest place thanks to incredible snowfall. During the winter of 1992 to 1993, 19 inches of snow fell here. In November 2023, the city wasn't so lucky either. Syracuse got buried under a thick layer of snow, and strong winds with gusts up to 35 miles per hour made things worse, causing a blizzard. This is not really news for this city. As far back as the 1900s, Syracuse was famous for its bad weather, all because of its proximity to Lake Ontario. The thing is, sometimes the so-called lake effect systems stall, causing snowstorms that can cover the city with up to several feet of snow in just one day. Well, remember, I've already talked about how this works. For example, one of the strongest blizzards in the city's history occurred in 1925, from January 29th to the 31st. During this period, the city got hit with 27 inches of snow. Another famous storm was the 1993 blizzard, which has been dubbed the Storm of the Century. Cornell University research showed that around 43 inches of snow fell on the city, which led to the first university shutdown in over 20 years due to weather conditions. In Syracuse, they usually use around 30,000 tons of road salt and over 100 snow plows to fight the snow. It seems like a lot, but there's really no other way to deal with the snow. And yeah, predicting the exact amount of snowfall is hard, which only makes things worse. Wildfire risk. Along with the snow, the northeastern U.S. is facing a high risk of wildfires. We should not thank the dry weather and winds for increasing the chances of sparks flying. This, of course, has been forcing people to leave their homes, like the residents of Warwick who lived too close to parks. The good news is that firefighters managed to handle the situation, protecting around 165 homes. The bad news is the risk of fires is, and will remain high for the near future. To be more precise, the biggest risk is faced by cities like Schenectady, Albany, and Rensselaer. These places have weather with low humidity from 35% to 50%, and dry vegetation only speeds up the spread of fire. Because of this, there are certain restrictions in New York State. For example, residents and visitors are not allowed to make bonfires to burn trash or branches, or to use an open flame for cooking. You also can't make bonfires outside of designated areas. Weather experts are also urging extra caution when using items that could cause ignition, like equipment or matches. And also, to prevent fires, cigarette butts must be properly put out and disposed of. And it's not just a warning or panic, the situation's really serious. From 2007 to 2023, there were an average of 117 wildfires a year in New York State, burning an average of 1,400 acres of land. That's already a lot. But the fire in Sterling Forest State Park in Warwick broke a new anti-record. The fire spread over more than 5,300 acres. Best apple orchard in America. Is there anything good in the upstate New York? Definitely. Take, for example, the gorgeous apple orchard considered the best in the U.S. It's called Beak and Skiff and is located on the hillsides along Route 20 in the town of Lafayette. The orchard has 20 varieties of apples, and this family business just keeps thriving over time. For instance, in 2013, 15,000 new trees were planted here, and by spring 2019, that number had grown to 300,000. Also, the Apple Hill Country Store and Bakery were opened here, and they also make cider from the apples. Basically, everything's going great at the orchard. If you suddenly feel like visiting this place, Beak and Skiff is open to guests 7 days a week from the end of August until the end of October. In the orchard, you'll find 6 main areas: the 1911 tasting space, a tavern, a shop, an apple barn, a bakery, and a kids' playground. In short, there's something for everyone. While the kids are playing in the treehouse, the adults can try some local cider and discover plenty of treats in the bakery, where you'll find donuts, pies, and cookies. But what's the secret of the orchard's prosperity? It's simple. The workers of the apple orchard just work hard and take good care of the apple trees. In winter, each of the 300,000 trees is pruned by hand. In spring, the orchard workers bring over 400 beehives for pollination and also carefully watch the weather to prevent any potential frost threats. In general, they do everything to make the trees happy. Imaginary town. If you type the name of the town Aglow into Google Maps, it'll actually show you that point. Anything interesting you can find there? Absolutely nothing. And no, there wasn't some kind of disaster that wiped the town off the map. It just never existed in the first place. This imaginary town was created by Otto Lindbergh and Ernest Alpens from General Drafting. While making a map of New York State in the 1930s, they joked around by using the initials of their names to create a non-existent town, which they placed at the intersection of unnamed roads. Years later, when competitors from Rand McNally included Aglow in their maps, General Drafting considered suing them. However, Rand McNally found a way out. At the spot where Aglow supposedly was, a store appeared. And despite there being no housing or an actual town, this was enough proof that Aglow existed. This mysterious place actually became famous thanks to John Green's novel Paper Towns, published in 2008, and later a movie with the same title was made. The main character disappears, leaving behind clues that lead to Aglow, a place that both exists and doesn't exist at the same time. You owe me a like since you've made it this far. See you later.